In this movie, we're going to take a look at production and post considerations that you should keep in mind before you start to capture and acquire 360 video. I put together a little bit of a list here of some things just for you to keep in mind as you go through 360 video production. This is some things that I would have liked someone to tell me before I began to play around with 360 video. And one thing that I would suggest is to keep the end in mind. And always keep in mind, where will your 360 degree movie be viewed? Is it going to be viewed in Oculus Rift, or is it going to be viewed on a smartphone? But whatever it is, keeping the end in mind can keep you focused the entire way throughout the pre-production and post-production process. Another thing you need to keep in mind is that you want a storyboard. You want to plan for 360 production. The more you plan, the better you're going to be able to tackle some of the challenges that will inevitably happen throughout the production and post-production process. So when I say storyboard, I want you guys to think plan as much as you can, talk about what you're going to do, and of course, research some of the best ways to capture 360 video. Of course, this goes without saying, you're filming with multiple cameras. So first of all, you need to figure out a way to sync them together. So if you don't have something like an Omni that will handle the synchronization for you, you're going to have to actually slate all of these videos and make sure that you can see a slate or a visual image or hear it. All 6 of the cameras or all the cameras that you have, or maybe you'll have to sync it using motion. Another thing you can keep in mind is that with multiple cameras, you have to make sure that you're recording in the same format. So you don't want to be recording at 24 frames per second in one camera while framing at 2997 frames in the other. If you don't have a Omni rig that's going to sync everything together, or other solutions that are out there that do something similar, keep in mind that you need to make sure that all of your recording formats match. And the more cameras, keep in mind, the more seams. The more seams that are created in between these cameras, that overlap area between the cameras, this could be problematic inside post-production or before post-production when you deal with the stitch. And in all this acquiring of this footage, you got to keep in mind that all of these cameras are going to require memory cards. They're going to require extra batteries and storage space. You need to keep in mind that you're going to need storage space to handle this, in some cases, over 4K footage material that you're going to need. And you're going to need to also have an optimized computer to work with. The crew and the camera, just keep in mind, are more than likely going to be in the scene. That's the advent of basically filming 360 video. You're going to have a whole entire production crew that more than likely you're going to want to get rid of. We're covering in a later movie of how we're going to get rid of just a simple camera rig from a shot that is inevitably going to show up as it's filming your 360 scene. Other things to keep in mind, parallax. So all of you guys have experienced parallax, and I'm just going to give the idea here that you're driving along in a car. And what you see is a bunch of objects in the foreground and a bunch of objects in the background. As you travel, looking out your window, the objects that are closer to you are going to appear to move faster than the objects that are further away. And with filming with multiple cameras, you've got to keep in mind that if you move the camera, parallax can happen. And in this movement, problems can happen along the seam lines, aka where those cameras meet. So keeping in mind parallax is a really important thing because it can get you into a lot of trouble in 360 video. You want to give your subjects a bit of distance from the camera to avoid some of these parallax problems that could take place throughout the seams of your camera footage. So just keep parallax at the back of your mind when you're filming and how you can prevent problems from happening when you bring this video footage in for the stitch. This whole VR 360 video experience is supposed to be immersive. So you want to make sure that your audio is just as immersive as your video. Some people capture sound for 360 using ambisonic microphones. Others will capture in stereo or even mono and then bring it into some audio software to create the immersive experience within post. So keep your audio in mind just as much as your video because it's equally as important. And I'm finished shooting, so now what? What is next is all about the stitch. And you know, when I think of the stitch, it definitely rhymes with something that I won't mention in this video, but it can be extremely difficult. All those cameras need to be assembled or stitched, and they need to be synced as well. With camera rigs of over 2 cameras, you're going to need to bring this into another type or application that handles stitching. There are a few out there, and the picture that you see here is something called Autopano Video Pro, which is produced by Color, now owned by GoPro. And I'm going to show an example of how a stitch works in this software in the next movie. But there's other software that does it too. Nuke as a program allows you to do it. And for simple stitches, such as the Samsung Gear 360 that we covered in the last movie, or two-dome formats like the Kodak Pix Pro, you can take that footage inside of After Effects and create a two-camera stitch, no problem. So you've got options for your stitch as well as other options online. Some camera manufacturers actually do the stitch for you, depending on who you go through. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So keep in mind all of these little tips for when you go forward. You want to make sure that you're prepared before you go out and figure it out the hard way.